Introduction. Riverdale High School. Nestled on the leafy outskirts of a quiet American suburb, Riverdale High School was the epitome of teenage dreams and drama. With its sprawling red brick buildings, perfectly trimmed football field, and banners fluttering in school colors, the campus looked every bit like a postcard from an all-American coming-of-age movie. By day, Riverdale bustled with students rushing from AP classes to art studios, their laughter echoing in the hallways. By night, the school transformed into a stage for secret crushes, study group marathons at the library, and the muffled beats of basement parties that every student seemed to know about, but teachers never quite discovered. In Riverdale, social status was currency. The cafeteria divided itself into invisible territories. Jocks and cheerleaders claimed the central tables, while the theater kids, debate team, and computer whiz crowd filled the edges with their inside jokes and after-school plans. Rumors traveled faster than the morning announcements. Friendships could be as fleeting as homecoming crowns. At the heart of it all was Alexis Morgan, a quiet, thoughtful junior, more comfortable with a notebook than a gossip session. Unlike her peers who thrived in the spotlight, Alexis preferred to blend into the background, focusing on her academics and doodling fashion designs in her spare time. Despite her reserved nature, Alexis couldn't help but feel drawn to the magic of American high school traditions. She had always dreamed about senior prom, the sparkling lights, the thumping music, the dancing, and the promise of one unforgettable night that would mark the end of adolescence and the beginning of whatever came next. Watching couples slow dance in the gym on movie nights, or hearing older students reminisce about their previous proms, made Alexis quietly hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, Riverdale High would become the backdrop for some of her happiest memories too. The fateful prom night. The air at Riverdale High was electric as prom night approached. A cocktail of anticipation, nerves, and endless speculation about what surprises the evening might hold. For weeks, students had buzzed with excitement over dress shopping, tuxedo fittings, and creative promposals that sometimes played out loudly in the cafeteria, drawing cheers and laughter. Even teachers seemed caught up in the atmosphere, reminiscing about their own high school days and reminding everyone to make good choices. For Alexis, the days leading up to prom were a blur of nervous energy. She saved up for months to buy the perfect pale blue dress, spending evenings in front of her mirror, rehearsing her hairstyle and makeup. Her small group of friends crowded into her bedroom that Saturday afternoon, giggling over curling irons and nail polish, taking endless selfies before slipping out the door as the sun dipped below the treetops. They piled into a rented limo, sharing excited whispers and secrets, hopeful that the night would become one of those cherished memories spoken about for years. The Riverdale gym had been transformed for the event. Twinkle lights wrapped every column, silver and navy streamers cascaded from the high ceiling, and a chocolate fountain stood surrounded by desserts almost too pretty to eat. Music vibrated through the building as students swept onto the dance floor in a blur of colors and laughter. Alexis couldn't help but feel her heart race with a mixture of joy and nervousness. Tonight, for once, she allowed herself to believe she belonged. As the DJ hit the first slow song, couples paired off and the room softened into a haze of shimmering movement. Alexis swayed along with her friends, letting the rhythm wash away her usual anxieties. Snapshots captured wide smiles and hopeful glances, fragments of youth frozen in time. For a few precious hours, everything seemed perfect. Alexis found herself swept up in the magic she'd always imagined, dancing beneath the lights, turning in circles, surrounded by the faces of her classmates, friends and foes alike, all united for one unforgettable night. The world beyond Riverdale faded away, and within those walls, it felt as if anything was possible. The cruel betrayal. If Alexis ever looked back on that fateful prom night, for all its shimmering lights and heady promise, one moment would forever overshadow everything. The moment trust shattered, the music faded into the backdrop, and the pristine image she'd built in her mind cracked wide open. It began with a sense of unease, subtle enough that Alexis brushed it off as nerves. After all, prom was supposed to be overwhelming, wasn't it? The gymnasium was pulsing with laughter and top 40 pop music, a swirl of tulle, sequins, and sharp suit jackets. Her group had snapped dozens of selfies, twirled through dances, and even raided the dessert table. Chocolate-dipped strawberries and pastel macarons, leaving smudges on napkins and memories on tongues. But as midnight approached, the crowd grew rowdier. The lights dimmed a little further, the music's bass line deepened, and strange whispers seemed to circulate around the room. Alexis noticed that her closest friends, Madison, Emily, Sarah, and Chloe, had been exchanging covert glances throughout the night. Their laughter, always a welcome chorus, now ringed with an unfamiliar edge. Then, the DJ paused the music. A hush fell, one of those dramatic moments where even the scent of cologne and hairspray seemed suspended in the air. Alexis's friends clustered together, almost forming a wall between her and the rest of the crowd. Madison, always the ringleader, clutched the microphone, a mischievous glint flickering in her eyes. "Before we kick off the next dance, we have something special to share," Madison announced, her voice echoing across the gym. The crowd perked up, sensing something about to happen, not the usual prom king and queen reveal. Alexis, standing just a few steps away, smiled nervously and waited, heart thumping, praying she wouldn't be called on to speak in public. But as she looked at the faces she thought she knew best, the unease returned, sharper than before. It started playfully. Emily projected photos onto the screen, silly snapshots from earlier in the semester, inside jokes, harmless teases. The crowd tittered. Alexis's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she chuckled along, trusting that her friends would never cross a line. They always said their friendship was about acceptance, but then the tone changed. Sarah's voice took on a mocking lilt as she recited private messages, jokes, and secrets Alexis had shared with them in confidence. The class gasped and snickered as texts scrolled across the giant projector. Insecurities about her grades, a crush she'd nursed for months on a boy in chemistry, even the story of her parents' divorce, the thing she'd never, ever wanted public. "She's always doodling in her notebook, pretending she's too cool for real friends," Chloe added, smirking as she ripped a page from Alexis's sketchbook and held it up to the crowd. "Guess she thought she'd become the next big designer. Sorry, Alexis, but you're just ordinary." The laughter was deafening. Students pointed, some too stunned to react, others unable to hold in their amusement at the spectacle. Teachers, caught off guard, exchanged glances, uncertain whether this was part of the night's official program. All Alexis could feel was her heart thrashing in her chest and a bitter taste crawling up her throat. Madison's final blow came quick and cruel. "Let's hear it for Alexis Morgan, the girl with secrets but no real friends." The words hung in the air, poisoning every breath Alexis tried to take. She muttered something, trying to defend herself, but the microphone cut her off. The girls turned their backs, walking off arm in arm. The humiliation was total in that instant. Alexis's world shrank to the pounding in her ears, in the burn behind her eyes. People she barely knew shot pitying looks. A few friends tried to reach her, but the damage had been done. Every atom of strength Alexis possessed was spent just standing upright as the crowd slowly pulled away, whispering behind cupped hands. The hours that followed blurred together. Alexis made her way outside, icy night air washing over her feverish skin. She gripped her shawl around her trembling shoulders and fumbled for her mom's number. Her fingers shook so badly, she nearly dropped her phone twice. When her mother arrived, Alexis slid into the back seat, not saying a word. The silence was heavy. Relief didn't come until the front door closed behind her and she collapsed in her room, muffled sobs soaking into her comforter. If it had ended there, perhaps Alexis could have convinced herself it was just a nightmare, a one-time mistake. But Riverdale High ran on, drama, and by morning, the betrayal was everywhere. The video of the reveal had already been posted on several social media accounts and was spreading like wildfire. Students tagged and commented, some sympathetic, more eager to join the viral storm. Her phone buzzed with notifications, some apologetic, many cruel. Even her favorite teachers looked at her differently that Monday, their faces full of hesitant concern, as if she might shatter at any moment. Madison's group, meanwhile, thrived in the aftermath. Their social currency had skyrocketed. There were whispers of their brave honesty, students applauding them for calling out someone who didn't fit. Rumors twisted, stories mutated. Suddenly, Alexis was cast as the desperate loner who clung too hard, needed to be put in her place. At home, Alexis became a ghost in her own life. She stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria, choosing instead to hide in the bathroom or the dusty corners of the art room. Her once bright sketches curled up in her backpack, pages never to see daylight again. Her grades slipped, sleep evaded her, and smiles became a memory. But beneath the numbness and humiliation, another feeling began to flicker: anger. Why had she ever trusted people who weaponized her secrets? Why should she accept the role of victim in a place she'd called home? For years, each comment, each sly glance in the hallway hardened her resolve. Alexis may have lost friends, but she had gained something else, the beginnings of a resolve born not only from pain, but also from a realization that she deserved so much more. What none of her classmates, least of all her betrayers, suspected was that the Alexis they had humiliated would not remain quiet forever. As she scrolled through the countless comments and watched, again and again, the clip of her own public humiliation, Alexis started to keep a record. Who laughed the loudest? Who shared the video? Who whispered behind her back? A plan was forming, as steady as her heartbeat. The world at Riverdale High had shifted, and Alexis Morgan would make sure it shifted again. This time, on her terms, darkness and transformation. In the weeks following prom, Alexis Morgan's world shrank. Gone were the colorful hallways and chatter. Sounds that once filled her days now fell away, leaving an overwhelming silence. At Riverdale High, her name had become a whispered punchline, the humiliation replayed on screens and refreshed in status updates. Every classroom felt colder. Every creaking locker, every glance in her direction felt loaded. The bustling, vibrant landscape of high school had hollowed itself out, making space only for shame. Alexis had never known how isolating shame could be. She soon realized it was not a single moment, but a running tide, one that seeped into her routines, distorting every comfort. Her phone, once a lifeline to classmates and group chats, became a source of dread. Unread messages piled up, some from distant acquaintances, awkwardly offering, "Are you okay?" Others anonymous, their cruelty sharpened by the confidence of invisibility. She tried to disappear. Alexis skipped lunches, hiding in the far stall of the girls' restroom, with her feet on the toilet seat, until the bell rang. Less and less did she show her face in class discussions, shrinking behind a curtain of hair, eyes fixed on the spiral of a blank notebook. The familiar faces of teachers who once welcomed her participation now glanced at her with uncertain, searching concern. In the art room, her former haven, she found it too painful to draw, fearing even a simple sketch would remind her of that night and that torn page. At home, Alexis's parents noticed the changes. Her mother hovered, leaving gentle notes outside her door. Her father, usually jovial and bustling, grew guarded and awkward in conversation, as if he were afraid that the wrong words might shatter her further. Even her little brother learned not to knock or pester her for help with homework. The light under her door stayed on longer into the night. Sleep became elusive. Alexis lay awake, reliving every cruel laugh, every flashing phone in the crowd. Her dreams were dark and restless, trapping her in endless reruns of the betrayal. Sometimes on the prom stage, sometimes in a classroom, sometimes in a lunchroom filled with silent, faceless figures. Waking up brought no escape. Morning light only delivered her into another cycle of survival. Yet grief did not remain the only occupant of her heart. As the days passed, numbness settled in, a dull armor against the world's scorn. Alexis let grades slip, let missed assignments amass like snow in January. She gave up on trying to defend herself when rumors twisted further. Let them talk, she thought. Let them decide who I am. But numbness was not the same as surrender. Underneath the aching rawness, there stirred something else. It was slow and almost imperceptible at first. The thrum of defiant thought, the echo of her own voice returning after being swallowed by the crowd. One afternoon, as Alexis scrolled absently through her Instagram feed, she paused at a photo, her face, caught mid-laugh from some happier fall afternoon, posted by one of her former friends with a mocking caption. Hot anger surged within her. Why should her story be told by those who betrayed her? It was a small moment, but it lit a spark. Alexis began to question everything. Her passivity, her need for approval, the ways she shrank herself to fit invisible expectations. She replayed scenes from before prom, looking for warning signs, for cracks in the friendships she once trusted. The sharper she looked, the clearer she saw patterns of manipulation. The subtle exclusions, the inside jokes at her expense, the pressure to conform, the delicate balancing act just to avoid becoming a target herself. Escape was not enough. She wanted understanding. Alexis searched for answers, articles about bullying and social hierarchies, stories of other teens who had been dragged into the court of public opinion and survived. She read about cyberbullying, the mental cost, and the long, bitter path to healing. She scrawled her fury in the margins of old notebooks. Then, gradually, she found solace in online communities, safe spaces where kids from all over the country shared stories of exclusion and resilience. Every empowering account helped chase the numbness away and plant new resolve. Night after night, Alexis started writing again. At first, it was just letters to herself, unsent and unsigned, letting her anger and pain spill freely. Then, her words turned outward. She wrote prayers for justice, for truth, for the chance to regain control over her own narrative. Her sketches, once hidden away, began as angry, jagged lines. Eventually, they softened, forming images of breaking chains, of shadows yielding to sunrise. Transformation didn't come all at once. There were setbacks, days when ridicule flared anew on social media, or when a careless comment in class sliced open a half-healed wound. But slowly, Alexis began to care less about the whispers. A voice inside her insisted, "You know who you are. You know what is true. They do not get to decide that anymore." As she took tentative steps toward self-assertion, Alexis noticed small but significant shifts. One afternoon, sitting alone in the art room, she overheard two classmates discussing the night of the betrayal. Instead of cowering, she stood and walked out, head held high. Later, she started eating lunch in a quiet corner of the library. Reclaiming the comfort of books and solitude, she reached out to an old friend from elementary school, someone unconnected to the toxic circles of drama. Their friendship rekindled slowly, gently, without expectation or judgment. The biggest change came not in her interactions with others, but in her relationship with herself. Alexis learned to forgive the old version of herself who longed so fiercely for acceptance. She recognized her vulnerability as something brave, not weak, and she made a vow, in scrawled pen on the back page of her journal, that she would never again relinquish her dignity for the approval of people who did not value her truth. Transformation, Alexis realized, was not about forgetting what had happened or pretending she wasn't hurt. It was about forging herself anew from the ashes, accepting that pain, yes, but insisting that it need not define her future. It was about refusing the easy role of victim and instead choosing purpose. In the darkness after prom, Alexis confronted who she was, and the clarity that followed cut through the haze of humiliation and fear. They might have taken her moment, but they would not take her will. Something stronger had begun to grow: resilience, agency, and a quiet conviction that the story of Alexis Morgan was far from over. The plan for revenge, Alexis's transformation, wasn't just emotional. It became strategic. After weeks spent shrinking in the shadows of Riverdale High, she realized that passivity only invited further cruelty. If pain was all her classmates expected, then her silence would only feed their narrative. One gray Sunday afternoon, as raindrops tapped the bedroom window and her parents' voices drifted distantly from the kitchen, Alexis sat upright at her desk and laid out a blank sheet of paper. This time, she was no longer sketching clothes or daydreams. She was mapping the blueprints for her own justice. Her plan wasn't born out of a need for drama, but from an aching desire to reclaim her story. What had happened that night, and the relentless fallout afterward, was simply too cruel to excuse. As she recounted every insult, every betrayal, and the viral humiliation, Alexis let herself feel the righteous anger that had simmered just beneath her sadness. Revenge, she realized, didn't have to look like the cartoonish plots in movies. It could be about truth and exposure, making her tormentors answer for the harm they'd inflicted. First, she began gathering information. The Riverdale High social scene ran on secrets. Some whispered in private Snapchats, others floating just out of earshot in crowded hallways. No one paid attention to Alexis anymore, assuming she was beaten and withdrawn. Invisibility, she discovered, could be a weapon. She listened, she watched, and she scrolled. Old conversations in group chats, rumors half buried in comment threads, screenshots saved impulsively in the past, all resurfaced as weapons in her new arsenal. She reviewed every social media post her former friends had made, digging for patterns: Madison's performative activism, Emily's caustic humor, Sarah's secret relationship with a rival school's quarterback, Chloe's plagiarism in the art contest, all laid bare with a little patience and digital sleuthing. She built a digital dossier, meticulously organized, screenshots, voice memos, even saved TikToks where jokes crossed the line into bullying or bigotry. But information, Alexis knew, was powerless without impact. She needed to wait. She studied the rhythms of the Riverdale rumor mill. When people scrolled their feeds the most, when gossip caught fire, when teachers were least likely to intervene. She didn't want to lash out and give them easy ammunition. Every detail of her plan was methodical, clinical almost. Part of her marveled at how cold she could become in pursuit of a higher justice. Alexis started with subtle leaks. Anonymously, she sent copies of Chloe's plagiarized artwork to the faculty member in charge of the school gallery. She forwarded screenshots of racist and ableist jokes Madison had made to an Instagram account known for exposing bullying in local schools. She made sure Sarah's secret relationship was outed in a way that couldn't be traced directly back to her. Each release was careful, targeted, designed not only for maximum impact, but also plausible deniability. The stories spread, sometimes slowly, but with a momentum all their own. The school's ecosystem began to buckle. Riverdale's normally unshakable it girls found themselves suddenly questioned, isolated, and cast out by the very classmates who once followed them. The art teacher quietly disqualified Chloe from a competition and sent a notice to her college admissions counselor. Sarah's boyfriend found out about her deception over DMs. He broke up with her publicly, and she became a meme overnight. Madison lost her volunteer position after screenshots surfaced, forcing her to deliver humbling apologies she didn't mean. Emily's brother saw her DMs and confronted her at the bus stop, prompting a shouting match that was caught on video and circulated around the school. Alexis watched these tiny earthquakes ripple through Riverdale High. For the first time since prom, she felt something like control. The looks in the hall changed. Where there had been thinly disguised pity or contempt, there was now confusion and sometimes fear. Rumors rustled like leaves. No one could quite pinpoint who was behind the curtain. Why were their secrets suddenly unraveling, one by one? But Alexis's intent reached beyond petty retribution. She wanted her old friends to understand what it felt like to be alone, exposed, and vulnerable. Still, she wrestled with guilt. Was she becoming like them? Some nights, she'd reread the nasty comments left under her name, then revisit the digital records she'd assembled. Harsh, damning evidence that kept her resolve from wavering. Along the way, she discovered allies in the most unexpected of places. A former member of Madison's clique, ousted after a minor fight, started DMing Alexis with new tips and screenshots. Another student, Tim, a quiet kid who'd been the target of a similar social media pile-on the year before, handed her a USB drive full of old group chat receipts. Unspoken solidarity formed between the school's exiles. They shared stories, sometimes darkly funny, sometimes raw and heartbreaking. Alexis was no longer fighting alone. Her cause had become something larger. The school administration couldn't ignore the mounting chaos. Faculty scheduled emergency assemblies, warning students about cyberbullying and digital footprints. Guidance counselors set up private meetings. Some students protested their innocence. Others fell quiet and withdrawn. Parents began to call the school, shocked at what was coming to light. A sense of reckoning hovered over Riverdale High. Alexis didn't gloat. She kept her head down, did her work, and let the evidence do the talking. The anger she'd once used for fuel slowly transformed into a kind of weary determination. She wasn't interested in cruelty for its own sake. She wanted exposure, justice, and, strangely, closure. Meanwhile, some students, previously enthralled by the cruel spectacle at prom, began speaking up. Several kids who had joined in mocking Alexis now reached out to her, some with apologies, others seeking information about how to protect themselves from the next wave of secrets. Not everyone was forgiving, and not every apology was sincere, but every single message reminded her how quickly the tides of social power could change. As the final stage of her plan, Alexis decided to share her own version of the story. She wrote a long, honest post on her private Instagram, explaining in broad, vulnerable strokes what the betrayal had felt like and how it had altered her, for better and worse. She didn't name her tormentors directly. She didn't have to. She focused on the importance of kindness, truth, and the dangers of letting cruelty go unchecked. Her post was reshared dozens of times. Some called her brave. Others thought she was just stirring the pot. That, Alexis realized, was out of her control. At the heart of her plan was a wish, fierce and enduring, that Riverdale would never again be a place where humiliation passed for entertainment. As each lie and secret unraveled, as her former friends learned the price of public cruelty, Alexis found herself on a new threshold. She had struck back, yes, but she had also changed the conversation. Her revenge was not just retribution. It was a demand that Riverdale High, and everyone in it, take a hard look at what they valued. And for Alexis, that was enough. She was no longer just the girl who'd been humiliated at prom. She was something else altogether. Someone who had fought, survived, and transformed the landscape of her own life. The world turned upside down. Riverdale High was no stranger to drama, but nothing had ever rattled its halls quite like the weeks that followed Alexis's campaign for justice. The atmosphere in the school shifted palpably. Whispers no longer swirled around Alexis, but instead around those who had once stood securely at the top of the social hierarchy. The balance of power shifted, subtle at first. Uncertain looks exchanged between students, small circles breaking apart in the lunchroom, hands trembling as phones buzzed with the latest rumors and revelations. Madison's clique, once untouchable, became the eye of a social storm that seemed to grow by the day. For years, they had walked the hallways with assured strides, laughing a little too loudly, expecting people to look up from their books and offer a smile or a quick hello. But something essential was broken now. Where there had once been awe in classmates' eyes, there was wariness, and just beneath it, a current of satisfaction, even poetic justice. Alexis observed the upheaval from a distance, never quite comfortable in her new role as a figure of hushed admiration. She went about her days quietly, slipping into classrooms just before the bell, withdrawing to the library during breaks. Still, people looked at her differently. Some offered nods or shy smiles. Other kids she barely knew suddenly started sitting near her at lunch or walking with her from class to class. It was as if her transformation and her refusal to remain a victim had reminded others just how fragile the high school ecosystem really was. Behind closed doors, teachers and administrators held emergency meetings. The guidance department sent out anonymous surveys about school culture, asking students to name acts of kindness and cruelty they'd witnessed. Teachers brought up safe spaces during morning announcements. The principal interrupted classes to sternly remind every student that bullying, online or otherwise, would have severe consequences from here on out. At home, the ripple effects of the upheaval were just as strong. Parents received lengthy emails about recent events in our learning community. Some kids were grounded, phones were checked, sometimes confiscated entirely, as families tried to get to the bottom of what had happened. The video of Alexis's prom night had made its way well beyond Riverdale, shared on community Facebook pages and whispered about by adults at the grocery store. For the first time, the adults in charge seemed truly concerned by the scale and suddenness of it all, unsure what to say to their children or to one another. But it wasn't just the so-called villains of the story who suffered. The entire student body found itself reevaluating friendships, alliances, and even the most routine interactions. Some long marginalized students seized the chance to speak up, sharing their own stories of exclusion and bullying during an impromptu student council forum. Others found themselves on the receiving end of suspicion. If you had laughed at Alexis's expense, if you had shared that video or commented on that post, it was impossible to hide from the new scrutiny. There was a collective reckoning, rooted in guilt, but also genuine self-reflection. Alexis, for her part, tried to rise above the worst of the circulating rumors. She did not gloat as her former friends stumbled. In fact, the spectacle brought her surprisingly little satisfaction. Instead, she found herself drawn to students she would never have spoken to before. The quiet, unfashionable girl from her history class. The shy, artistic sophomore boy who stayed behind to stack chairs after drama club meetings. In the chaos, she recognized that so many students carried private scars. Her pain had merely torn open a wound that ran far deeper through the community. One morning, as Alexis made her way to first period, she found Madison waiting by her locker. It was the first time they'd been face to face since prom night.
I messed up.
Madison's eyes were rimmed red, her shoulders squared in visible effort. For a moment, it seemed as if she might lash out with some new insult. But instead, she offered something like an apology, halting, mumbled, but real. "I didn't think it would go that far," she said, her gaze fixed on the floor. There were no excuses, just the raw discomfort of shared history. Alexis listened, uncertain if she wanted forgiveness, but she nodded anyway. "We can't change what happened," she said quietly, "but we don't have to make it worse." Those words, and the hesitant handshake that followed, circulated almost as quickly as the old video had. The story now one not of revenge, but of uneasy peace. Alexis's act of grace did not erase what had happened, nor did it magically heal all wounds. But it offered the school a new script, one where growth and responsibility might override the impulse for cruelty or vengeance. In the weeks that followed, initiatives sprang up across Riverdale. Students started an anonymous kindness wall in the main hall, where anyone could post a thank you note or an apology, and the guidance counselor's office buzzed with appointments from students wrestling with guilt or confusion. Clubs organized volunteer opportunities outside of school, challenging students to collaborate and see one another outside the lens of gossip and hierarchy. For Alexis, the world had turned inside out, but so had she. Where her old certainty had been dashed to pieces, a new sense of self slowly emerged, stronger, less eager to please, more aware of her own boundaries. She found herself speaking up in class again, her hand steady when answering questions, her voice clear when she disagreed with a teacher or a classmate. She returned to her sketchbook, drawing portraits of her classmates not as caricatures, but with the complexity and warmth she'd come to recognize in herself. But most of all, Alexis learned the value of resilience, not just in surviving humiliation, but in refusing to allow pain to define her forever. The world she knew had been overturned, but somehow the chaos had carved out new possibilities, new friends, new truths, even some small, surprising acts of forgiveness. By the end of that tumultuous term, Riverdale High still bore the marks of scandal, but it was a different place, a little kinder, a little braver, and perhaps just a little more real than before. Looking back, Alexis understood that justice wasn't about restoring the old order or maintaining an illusion of perfection. Sometimes, it meant letting the world turn upside down, so something better could rise from the wreckage. Values re-examined. For weeks after the upheaval, Riverdale High was a changed world. The events surrounding Alexis and the fallout within Madison's clique had shaken the foundations of what students thought they knew about themselves, their peers, and what counted as winning in the ruthless hierarchy of adolescence. Beneath the surface chaos, something deeper had begun, a process of reckoning, silent at first, growing each day as students compared the old rules to what they now saw as possible. For Alexis, those days blurred with a gentle ache. The wounds left by her betrayal were healing, but their scars remained, reminders that trust, once shattered, could never fully return to its original shape. Yet in that emptiness, she found the space to ask herself hard questions. Who had she really wanted to become? What was friendship supposed to mean? Which parts of herself had she hidden or even lost, while so desperately seeking approval from the wrong people? Returning to her old sketchbook, Alexis saw her own growth reflected in the evolving lines on the page. What started out as scratchy, angry sketches gradually grew more expansive and thoughtful. She drew scenes of students standing together, not apart, images where difference was celebrated, not punished. She realized, almost with a shock, that her art no longer tried to imitate the styles of the popular crowd or her ex-friends. Instead, each drawing became an assertion of her own vision, a quiet declaration that her worth wasn't dependent on acceptance from those who had rejected her. As the school's new routines took shape, conversations turned real in a way they never had before. Homeroom became a forum for open expression. Students spoke, sometimes through tears, about exclusion, anxiety, and the dangers of chasing status at the expense of kindness. Teachers listened and, in some cases, admitted their own blind spots. There were awkward silences, and many apologies struggled for the right words, but they were genuine. Even the groups known for being aloof or unapproachable found themselves drawn into unexpected moments of honesty. Alexis, still careful but less timid, began responding when classmates wanted advice or simply someone to listen. She found herself befriending students she wouldn't have noticed a semester ago. A transfer from out of state with a love for poetry, a science geek who spent lunch drawing superheroes, a basketball player recovering from injury. They didn't ask her about the prom night incident. Instead, conversations revolved around mutual interests, dreams for the future, and what it really meant to belong. Madison and her former friends changed too. Some left the social spotlight entirely, working quietly with teachers on anti-bullying clubs and peer counseling. Others struggled with the consequences of exposure, learning the uncomfortable difference between being liked for a facade and being respected for sincerity. For Madison, in particular, the lesson was hard-won and ongoing. She stopped by Alexis's locker once a week, not always to talk, sometimes just to nod or leave a note. There was no expectation of restored friendship, but space for both to move forward with dignity. Riverdale's parents, teachers, and alumni took notice. The school hosted workshops run by professionals who had once been victims of bullying themselves. Local newspapers reported on the Riverdale reckoning, framing it not as a scandal, but as a model for change. For a while, it made the community uncomfortable, exposing how many had been content to ignore silent suffering. But as parents watched their own children growing braver and kinder, perspectives shifted. Outside of Riverdale, Alexis felt the effects too. Her story had reached supportive corners online. Posts and artwork she shared about survival and resilience found an unexpected audience, including messages from teens across the country experiencing their own versions of betrayal. Through DMs and virtual meetups, Alexis connected with a network of people who understood not just the pain, but also the slow, uneven process of healing. Self-worth, Alexis learned, couldn't be measured in likes or followers. The most transformative moments came not from grand gestures, but from the small, persistent acts of choosing respect, both for others and most of all, for herself. She made a habit of checking in on students eating alone, leaving encouragement notes in library books, and participating in art and kindness projects throughout the school. Instead of trying to erase the past, she used it. Her experiences became a source of quiet wisdom. There were setbacks, of course. A spiteful post here, a mean comment overheard there. But Alexis no longer allowed them to undo her. A message began to spread at Riverdale. The value of a person lay not in their social standing, but in their courage to be real. Class officers invited Alexis to speak at a school assembly, and though she was nervous, she agreed. Her speech, simple and earnest, didn't mention her betrayers or the viral video. Instead, she talked about isolation, forgiveness, and the challenge of holding both hurt and hope at the same time. "What matters," she said, standing before a hushed gymnasium, "isn't how many people you impress, but how honestly you live, especially when no one's watching. For a long time, I tried to change myself for people who would never want to know the real me. I was so afraid of being different that I let myself become invisible. But pain doesn't have to make you disappear. Sometimes it can remind you what matters most." There was no thunderous applause, just a long, shimmering moment of silence, which said everything. Afterward, students came up to thank her, some with tears, others just needing to be seen. The respect she gained was subtle, but it felt real for the first time. As spring ripened and graduation approached, the meaning of Alexis's ordeal became clearer. She had lost illusions, yes, but also gained an unshakable foundation. In her family, more open communication blossomed. With new friends, laughter returned, gentler and truer than she remembered. She applied to art schools now with a portfolio that included not just drawings, but short essays about bravery, belonging, and the cost of silence. Alexis's story became part of Riverdale's fabric, a reminder that every community is sustained not by its image, but by the truths it dares to face. The value of kindness was not just an ideal. It was practiced, stumbled over, rebuilt. Cruelties no longer slid by, unnoticed. Memories of suffering could not be undone, but they could be transformed. Ultimately, it was not revenge, but resilience and compassion that made Riverdale a place worth belonging to. For Alexis, this new chapter meant more than recovery. It marked the beginning of a life lived on her own terms. She walked through the school's halls, no longer invisible, nor defined by what was done to her. Instead, she owned her narrative, proud of the strength it took to choose grace after darkness. The world, finally, had learned to see her clearly. And Alexis, for the first time, saw herself in full, forgiven, unafraid, and free.